The story surrounding the Lincoln Memorial reflecting pool is a perfect example of how politics can turn a straightforward maintenance issue into a dramatic public spectacle. For weeks, there were repeated claims that the pool had been the target of determined vandals who had supposedly carved hundreds of feet of damage into its protective liner. The language used was dramatic, almost cinematic. It created the impression that organized groups had deliberately attacked one of America's most recognizable monuments. Once a claim like that enters the political conversation, it spreads quickly because it is emotional, simple, and easy to repeat. The problem is that repeating a claim is not the same thing as proving it. Then something happened that complicated the story. Photos and videos emerged showing crews cleaning up the area after a massive fireworks display. The reflecting pool was surrounded by barriers, warning signs were everywhere, and workers were collecting debris left behind by the celebration. Instead of looking like the aftermath of a targeted attack, the area looked like the aftermath of an enormous public event that naturally created a huge cleanup operation. That immediately raised an obvious question. If officials had spent so much time blaming mysterious vandals, why wasn't the cleanup from the fireworks receiving the same attention? It almost felt like two completely different stories were being told about the same location. That is where the real decoding begins. In modern politics, controlling the first version of a story is often more valuable than proving the story itself. Once people hear the words vandals attacked a national monument, many never go back to examine whether the evidence actually supported such a dramatic conclusion. First impressions are incredibly powerful. They stick in people's minds even when later information creates serious doubts. That is why politicians on every side of the political spectrum fight so hard to frame events before anyone else does. When reporters eventually pushed officials for specifics, the answers became noticeably less certain. The explanation was that there were multiple cuts in the industrial liner which supposedly added up to roughly 350 feet of damage. That sounds precise, but describing damage and proving who caused it are two completely different things. Reporters immediately asked the obvious follow-up. If there were cameras covering the area, where was the footage showing people committing the vandalism? Instead of presenting clear evidence, officials responded that they had video, eyewitness reports, and evidence that was now part of the legal process. That answer might sound reasonable at first glance, but it conveniently placed the proof somewhere the public could not examine. The claim became, trust us, the evidence exists, but you cannot see it because the courts are handling it. That may occasionally be true in genuine criminal investigations, but it also creates a situation where extraordinary claims rely almost entirely on public trust rather than public verification. The exchange itself became more revealing than the original allegation. Every time reporters asked for something concrete, the response shifted slightly. There was damage. There were measurements. There were witnesses. There was video. The evidence existed, but it remained just out of reach. Whether intentional or not, that style of communication leaves ordinary viewers with an uncomfortable feeling. It sounds confident without actually answering the central question being asked. Then television coverage entered the picture and made things even stranger. Footage aired showing distant, blurry surveillance images of people leaning toward the reflecting pool. The commentators openly admitted they could not independently verify what viewers were seeing. No arrests had been made. There was no publicly available police report explaining exactly what the individuals were doing. Yet the presentation strongly implied guilt simply because someone happened to be near the water. That is worth thinking about because blurry surveillance footage has become one of the most effective storytelling tools in modern media. Show viewers grainy images, add dramatic narration, ask suspicious questions, and the audience often fills in the missing details themselves. Human beings naturally want stories to have villains. Once someone is visually connected to a controversy, many people assume there must be a reason, even when almost no evidence has actually been presented. The irony is difficult to ignore. The footage did not clearly show anyone damaging anything. It did not explain what objects, if any, were being used. It did not establish intent. It simply showed people near the pool. That gap between implication and proof matters because democratic societies depend on evidence, not assumptions. Suspicion is not the same thing as accountability. Another question inevitably surfaced regarding whether presidential vehicles themselves could have contributed to any damage. Heavy government motorcades are not exactly lightweight machines. Reporters asked whether the vehicles used during presidential visits might have stressed the newly installed surface. The response was immediate. Officials insisted that the president had not been traveling in the heaviest armored vehicle on that occasion and emphasized that precautions had been taken before the visit. Again, notice the pattern. Rather than ending speculation with independently verifiable information, the public was asked to accept official assurances. Perhaps those assurances were completely accurate. Perhaps they were not. The larger issue is that trust becomes harder to maintain when transparency feels selective. People become increasingly skeptical whenever explanations rely primarily on confidence instead of documentation. The financial side of the story introduces another layer that deserves attention. Initial promises suggested repairs would cost less than $2 million. Later reports indicated costs had climbed well beyond $15 million, with additional work still being required. That is not a small budgeting error. It is a dramatic difference that naturally invites questions about planning, oversight, and project management. Officials defended the outcome by arguing that the major leak had been solved. According to their explanation, only a tiny fraction of the industrial liner remained damaged and needed replacement. Technically, both statements can be true. A project can solve its primary engineering problem while simultaneously costing far more than originally promised. The issue is not simply whether repairs worked. The issue is whether public expectations were managed honestly from the beginning. This pattern extends far beyond a single reflecting pool. One of the defining characteristics of modern political communication is the tendency to announce success long before success has actually been achieved. Grand promises generate headlines. Quiet revisions rarely do. By the time costs increase or timelines slip, public attention has usually moved elsewhere. That is why these smaller controversies often become symbols of something much larger. They are not simply arguments about concrete, rubber liners, or fireworks debris. They become debates about competence, credibility, and whether citizens believe what they are being told. The humorous comparisons about unqualified employees using artificial intelligence illustrate a broader criticism rather than a literal accusation. The joke works because many people recognize the underlying anxiety. Imagine someone confidently claiming expertise during a job interview, only to discover on the first day that they barely understand the tools required to perform the work. Instead of admitting their limitations, they frantically search for shortcuts while hoping nobody notices. The comedy lands because it exaggerates a fear that exists in many workplaces. Confidence often gets rewarded more quickly than competence. People can become remarkably skilled at sounding knowledgeable while avoiding detailed scrutiny. Artificial intelligence then becomes a convenient safety net, allowing individuals to generate impressive-looking work without fully understanding the subject themselves. Whether that comparison fairly describes any administration is ultimately a matter of political opinion, but the metaphor reflects a wider cultural concern. As technology becomes more capable, distinguishing genuine expertise from polished presentation becomes increasingly difficult. That challenge extends far beyond politics into business, education, media, and countless other professions. The second workplace analogy, involving the job applicant refusing to demonstrate Excel skills until being paid, pushes the satire even further. It flips the normal expectations of accountability on their head. The interviewer wants proof before hiring. The applicant demands payment before providing proof. The absurdity lies in watching both sides insist that trust should come first. Applied politically, the joke suggests a world where officials make sweeping claims while resisting demands for verification. Citizens ask for evidence. Leaders ask for patience. Critics ask for documentation. Supporters ask for loyalty. Everyone claims to possess the truth, while independent proof often arrives much later, if at all. That dynamic is not unique to one political party or one administration. It has become one of the defining characteristics of modern political communication across much of the democratic world. Public relations increasingly competes with public accountability. Narrative frequently moves faster than facts. The final discussion broadens the conversation even further by shifting toward questions of ethics, power, and personal enrichment. Critics argue that some political leaders begin viewing electoral victory not simply as permission to govern but as permission to reshape institutions around their own interests. Whether discussing aircraft, construction projects, government contracts, or luxury facilities, the underlying concern remains the same. Are public resources serving the public, or are they gradually becoming tools for political image building and private advantage? Comparisons with authoritarian systems emerge because critics see familiar patterns. Strong leaders often centralize decision-making, dismiss criticism as politically motivated, and present themselves as uniquely qualified to solve national problems. Over time, institutions become increasingly dependent on personalities rather than established rules. Whether such comparisons are fair is a subject of intense political disagreement, but they arise because history has shown how democracies can slowly drift when accountability weakens. One of the most revealing aspects of these debates is how frequently the conversation returns to costs. Projects that were supposed to be inexpensive become expensive. Gifts turn out to require major taxpayer-funded modifications. Construction proposals expand beyond their original budgets. None of these issues automatically prove wrongdoing, but repeated discrepancies gradually erode public confidence. Citizens begin wondering whether optimistic announcements are genuine forecasts or simply political marketing. Trust is difficult to build and remarkably easy to lose. Governments rely on public confidence to function effectively. When official statements repeatedly conflict with later realities, even supporters begin asking tougher questions. Skepticism grows not because of a single controversy but because small inconsistencies accumulate over time. Ultimately, the reflecting pool debate is about far more than damaged liners or fireworks debris. It illustrates how political narratives are created, defended, challenged, and amplified in real time. Every press conference becomes a contest over credibility. Every television segment becomes an attempt to shape perception. Every unanswered question invites further speculation. The larger lesson is surprisingly simple. Citizens should resist accepting dramatic claims merely because they are confidently delivered. They should also avoid rejecting explanations simply because they dislike the person giving them. Healthy skepticism requires applying the same standard to everyone. Ask what the evidence actually shows. Separate verified facts from political interpretation. Distinguish between confident language and demonstrable proof. That approach is slower, less emotionally satisfying, and rarely produces viral headlines, but it remains one of the strongest defenses against manipulation. As global politics grows more polarized and media ecosystems become increasingly fragmented, this habit of careful scrutiny becomes even more important. Every government, regardless of ideology, has incentives to present itself in the best possible light. Every opposition has incentives to emphasize failure. Somewhere between those competing narratives usually lies a more complicated reality. Decoding events means refusing to stop at the first explanation, examining what is known, questioning what is merely implied, and recognizing that the biggest story is often not the accusation itself but the process through which the accusation is built, defended, and sold to the public.